Hello makers, it's finally time. I've had the palette and then the palette plus for over a year now, and it's time for me to give you a very long overdue review of this incredibly awesome machine. Now I'm not going to go through all the way you set it up, because honestly speaking, Mosaic Manufacturing have done an absolutely great job on putting videos up on their website in order to show you how to set up the palette and everything, but I will go through some scenarios and explain how it works. First off, what is the Palette Plus? Well, the Palette Plus is a machine which takes in 4 different types of filaments, either 4 colors or 4 different materials, and has the ability to be hooked up to pretty much almost any printer that runs on 1.75mm filaments, and gives that printer the ability to print in multicolor or multi-material. The way it does this is by splicing the filaments together, joining filaments in a very advanced manner in order for it to be consistent and just literally just spit out one single strand of filament with multiple materials on it. The way it works is you slice your model in Simplify 3D or Cura. Once you have sliced your multi-part model, then you import it into Chroma, which is a software for the Palette Plus. What you do then in Chroma is specify what type of material, what type of color you're going to be printing each part in, and then it calculates the purge block on the side. It positions everything in the appropriate manner to fit your build plate, and then simply extracts 2 files, one for the Palette Plus and one for your printer. What happens after that is pretty much what I would consider to be a mathematical genius, because the amount of engineering compacted in this little box is just mind-blowing. The way it works is you choose the file you want to print, and then the Palette Plus will ask you to insert the filaments that you chose in Chroma. It will all load them in to the appropriate length thanks to the filament sensors that it has. Once all filaments are set up, it goes through a flywheel kind of thing, which chooses which filament will be pushed through. Once the appropriate length is pushed through, a blade will cut the filament, and the flywheel will then turn, will choose a different filament. That filament is pushed through, and this is where the magic starts to happen. You have a mechanism which pretty much heats up the filament. You have a stepper motor which pushes the filament in, and then you have another stepper motor which pushes the filament back into the other filament. And with the heat that's happening within this little piece of mechanism, this tube, it basically fuses the filaments together. Once it fuses the filament together for a few seconds, it then pushes it out. There is a cooling fan which instantly cools the filament, and the filament just keeps on running through the Bowden tube. The next stage is the filament goes through the Bowden tube, and then it ends up going through what's called, I think it's a scroll wheel or a scroll dial. The job of this little piece of mechanism is to calculate how much filament is actually going through the Palette Plus. It has no other way of calculating how much filament is going through except through the scroll wheel. You then push the filament through your 3D printer, and you slowly push it through until the Palette Plus actually tells you to, because it's part of the calibration process, which tends to calculate how much length there is and at which point is the filament extruded. Once the loading is done, you simply start your print, and everything else is just a matter of a waiting game. Now, I had the pleasure of using the Palette and the Palette Plus, so I was very lucky enough to actually see the difference between the 2 machines. Now, the original Palette was already actually quite mind-blowing to me back then. What they've done with the Palette Plus, they've made it basically 100 times better and easier to use than the first one was. Originally, the calibration was quite complicated to fine-tune it. However, with the Palette Plus and the new updates they keep on pushing out, it's all a matter of literally just slicing your calibration model, which is here, putting it up in both the printer and the Palette Plus, and you let it do its thing. Once it starts printing the calibration model, all it does is it calculates the loading offset and the print value. So basically, how much filament was expected to be used versus how much filament was actually used. So it can get a bit of a better calibration of the length of the filament and how much filament is being used by the printer. Next is kind of like where more magic starts happening, because ultimately the Palette Plus is in no way, shape or form connected to the electronics of the printer. So there's no electrical way, let's call it, or no communication between the two, and therefore it can never know what the printer is doing, except for one simple thing that Mosaic Manufacturing have thought of. The Palette Plus, while it's printing, it tends to beep, stop once in a while. That's because it's reading pings. Pings are the value the Palette Plus uses in order to determine how much filament was used at certain positions of the print. So when you slice the model and it does the purge block, it makes sure that the printer pauses for maybe 20 seconds at certain points during the purge block. When that pause happens and the scroll wheel stops receiving filament, the Palette Plus knows that that is the time to send a ping and see what the offset value is. It keeps on doing those pings all throughout the print, and what happens, you start receiving the ping feedback. So ideally it would be 100%, but sometimes there are deviations which you can calibrate. That's something I won't be getting into in this episode. However, what those pings tell the Palette Plus is how far off from the target is the printer going. So if it's printing more than it should, it's gonna give it like a 104% ping. So the Palette Plus then just starts recalibrating itself, so it reduces that ping, it reduces that distance, so it starts possibly moving the splices further away from each other in order to counteract for the ping distance of over or under 100%. This is a non-engineer trying to explain this. As I mentioned, this thing has some incredible engineering going on inside. This thing has 4 stepper motors to pull the filament in. It has 1 stepper motor to push the filament out. It has a stepper motor which controls the heating element, and it has another stepper motor that controls the flywheel, I call it, which cuts the filament, which has a little blade attached to it. So that's 7 stepper motors and a lot of other things. It's an absolute marvel. Now, before anyone starts complaining about purge blocks, I do highly recommend you check this link out over here. I've done an in-depth look at why purge block exists and why they have to be there and to what extent they have to be there. So I won't be getting into that now. However, what I will say is that from the Palette till the Palette Plus, a lot of things have changed. And to give you a bit of an idea, this was a model I printed on the CR10 with the Palette, and this was the purge block. It's quite heavy. I think it was about 5 or 6 times heavier than the model. Just to give you a comparison, this, while slightly more dense, is actually 4 colors. And what I want you to look at is the actual footprint. And what happened there is that they made the Palette Plus much more efficient than the Palette was. First of all, they give you much more flexibility in transitioning. So basically, to give you an idea, the model that I just printed, this is 4 colors. So this is a fully dense block. This is like 100% infill. The bottom layers are at around 13 centimeters of transition length. The smaller cube is about 10 centimeters of transition length. And with the CR10, I can usually use about 8 centimeters of transition length, depending on the colors I am using, because if you're using highly contrasting colors, then you need a larger transition length. But that's to give you an idea that there's so much flexibility in this. And now, to make matters even more interesting, they've took a suggestion that people were saying, and that is using infill as part of the transition. Now, you can't always use that with small models, but with larger models, it comes in very handy, because if you have a lot of infill on that model, you can actually start purging the filament inside the model itself, reducing the size of the purge lock quite a lot. Obviously, a lot of people will say, I'd rather paint my models. That's all well and good. However, with multi-material models, you can't really paint soluble support. So that's where this comes very handy when you want to do multi-material printing. So for example, this is something I've been experimenting with. I haven't fine-tuned it just yet, but this is basically PLA on the side, and then it has TPU on the front. And this is supposed to act as a hinge. I still have to figure out the right orientation to print this in, and the reason for that is because TPU and PLA might not like to stick together that well. So it's not just a matter of combining any filaments, any type of filament you want. There has to be a certain degree of agreement with the filament. So TPU and PLA don't really like to stick together, and the only reason why I could do this, even though it's kind of splitting, is because the TPU is actually printed within the PLA part. So basically, if you do a cross section, it kind of looks like this. And as you can see, the TPU goes inside sort of to hold it in order to have that flexible hinge and have the TPU stay within its parameters. Next up is Soluble Support. I've had a lot of success using PLA and Scaffold by E3D, and this is an example. This is an upside down benchy which I printed on the Enervision EV160. This was the purge block for it, and as you can see, it turned out absolutely great. All this was sliced in Simplified 3D because I found that printing multi-part models on Simplified 3D for me seemed much easier than Cura. But yeah, that's one of them. This is another one. This was also printed with PLA inside. It has a suspended ball, with Scaffold inside. And I have another one right here, which I have yet to throw in the water to dissolve the PVA. There's so much you can do with this, and at $800 it might not be for everyone. Even on a technical level, it might not be for everyone because it can get frustrating at times, it can get complicated, but it's definitely extremely rewarding. One of my absolute favorite features on this machine is the ability to just do random splices of filament. You put 4 colors in. I've showcased that on another episode where I printed the Noob rack. It's just a matter of grabbing 4 rolls of different filaments. I tend to use the end of the spool filaments. You just throw them in and you just let it tell it, splice 50 meters worth of filament in random patterns, and you can just start printing whatever you want. If it's something that you're going to spray or paint over, then it doesn't really matter what it looked like underneath. You can also use that as a feature called end of spool filament. So if you have 4 or 5 spools of filament which are the same color, you can actually feed them through the Palette Plus, and it will spit out one single strand of filament by joining those end of spools together. So you can just re-spool one larger spool from the 4 small spools that you had. As I mentioned, this machine is not for everyone. It still has a bit of a ways to go in order for it to be a streamlined machine, something that's very easy to use and that everyone can just sort of set up and go. At the moment, it's just not there yet. You need to have a lot of patience and you need to be able to tinker. Personally, for me, I've been using this for a year now, well over a year. I've had customer prints, and even though that a lot of people will say it's not worth the waste of the purge block for one single print, I'm gonna agree. If it's one single print, it's not worth it. But if you want to print, I don't know, if for this benchy, if I could fit 100 of these benchies at the same time on the single build plate, the purge block would have been the same size. So this is more for quantity. If you have someone who wants, I don't know, 100 multicolored keychains, then it's definitely worth it. If you have a business of doing multi-material or multicolor, then definitely this is by far worth the money, because you'll get your money's worth very quickly. Now, I'm quite sure I might have left a couple of things out. Truth is that there is so much to say about this machine that it's very difficult to kind of condense into one video. I wanted to showcase the ability, or pretty much the mechanics that go into this. And Mosaic Manufacturing have done an incredible job transitioning from the original palette to the Palette Plus. It's come leaps and bounds in just 1 year. So honestly speaking, I cannot even begin to imagine where they're gonna take this. The fact that the Palette was like $1,000, the Palette Plus was so much better and was $800, or is $800, it simply means that going forward, thinking with that logic, this is gonna be smaller, better, and less expensive and easier to use, because that's the trend I am seeing. It's becoming easier and easier to use. I know a lot of people have been very frustrated with this and they didn't want it because it just wasn't easy enough for them. So bear in mind that this is a very good investment. I love this machine and I use it religiously for customer prints. But once again, it's not for everyone. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. As for me, the reason why I haven't done this sooner is because of all the things I've mentioned. Every time I got ready to do the review of the Palette Plus, first it started with the Palette, then they said to me, well, the Palette Plus is coming out. Okay, I'll just wait for the Palette Plus. I start doing the review process, then more features come in, then a new chroma comes in, and then more features are added. So now I decided, as of right now, this is how it is. Going forward, I'm sure there'll be much more updates to this machine. That is it for me, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I will leave links in the video description to where you can get more information on the Palette Plus. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below. The customer support of Mosaic Manufacturing is absolutely incredible and unparalleled. I am sure they will be monitoring. If you have any technical questions, just leave them in the comment section below. I'm sure they will check them out. As for me, well, I want to thank my patrons. I want to thank you guys for watching. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and as always, happy making, guys.